Why did my husband change after my sister moved? The day my husband stopped looking at me the same way, I felt it in my bones. He didn't say anything cruel, didn't shout or withdraw in a dramatic gesture, but his eyes no longer lingered on mine. They passed over me like I was a fixture in the room, no longer his wife. It was a subtle shift, like the slow cooling of summer into fall, barely perceptible at first, and it began the exact day my sister moved into our home. Ellie had always been the wild one, the pretty one, the magnetic storm that pulled people into her orbit. We were 6 years apart, but she'd somehow always been ahead of me in life. Emotionally, socially, even when it came to love, I used to think of her as my other half, but that trust would be tested in ways I never imagined. My husband, Daniel, had been my rock for 7 years. We weren't perfect, who is? But we had the kind of easy companionship that made people envy us at dinner parties. I'd find his coffee cup on the counter in the morning, always clean and waiting for the next brew, and somehow it made me feel loved. It's the little things that bind a marriage. And it's the little things that unravel it. At first, it seemed harmless. Ellie needed a place to crash. Her relationship had imploded, something about cheating and betrayal. The details were fuzzy and painful. She showed up at our door with mascara, streaked cheeks, and a single suitcase, her voice trembling with shame. Of course, I said yes. She stayed in the guest room, and I did what any good sister would do. I brought her tea, gave her space, and let her vent. Daniel was supportive, offering her the same calm reassurance he gave me during our rough patches. He even cooked her favorite meals, and I thought, how lucky am I to have a husband who treats my family like his own? But then I noticed him pausing longer when she entered the room. Not just pausing, watching. There was a softness in his gaze I hadn't seen directed at me in months. She would laugh at something he said, and he'd laugh back a little too long. I tried to brush it off as paranoia. After all, she was beautiful, but she was my sister. He would never, right? Then came the night I walked into the kitchen and found them standing a bit too close. They jumped apart like teenagers caught sneaking a kiss, and I forced a laugh, pretending not to notice. My heart, however, started pounding in a way it hadn't since high school heartbreaks. Daniel reassured me. You're imagining things, he said. You're just tired. She's your sister. Don't be ridiculous. But it was there, under the surface. The way her robe seemed shorter each evening, the way his hand lingered when he handed her a cup of coffee, the inside jokes that didn't include me. And slowly, a distance began to grow between Daniel and me. Fewer conversations, less laughter, a colder bed. It wasn't just jealousy, it was grief. I was losing 2 people at once. My husband and my sister, and they were both right in front of me, pretending nothing was happening. And so I started watching. Carefully, quietly. I didn't want to be the crazy wife. I didn't want to be the bitter sister. But I had to know, I had to be sure. Because something in me had already broken, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be put back together. Ellie showed up on a rainy Tuesday evening, soaked and shaking like a leaf. Her mascara had run in twin trails down her cheeks, and her suitcase, a small frayed roller bag, looked like it had been packed in a rush. I opened the door, stunned. I hadn't seen her in almost a year, and she hadn't warned me she was coming. She fell into my arms without a word, her body trembling. I wrapped her in a towel and ushered her inside, calling for Daniel, who appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He gave her a sympathetic smile, a glance I thought nothing of at the time, and helped me get her settled. Ellie had just broken up with her boyfriend, Luke, a long, dramatic relationship that had always seemed more toxic than tender. According to her choked-up account between sobs and sips of hot tea, she'd caught him cheating on her with someone she knew. "A friend," she said, her voice bitter. "I feel so stupid." We didn't press for details that first night. She was clearly fragile. Her normally bold demeanor dulled into something raw and wounded. I let her stay in the guest room, helped her into clean clothes, and made her favorite spaghetti with extra cheese, the one Mom used to make when we were little and scared. She clung to me that night. "I just need a few weeks," she said. "I can't be alone right now." I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said. "You stay as long as you need." In the days that followed, she slowly began to come back to life. Her voice returned lighter, more playful. Her makeup returned too, thicker than usual, her style more daring than what I remembered. At first, I chalked it up to her coping mechanism. Ellie had always used beauty as armor. Daniel was kind to her, as I knew he would be. He asked about her work, offered to pick up groceries for her special diet, even brought her a book he thought she'd enjoy. He was being a good brother-in-law. That's what I told myself. But there were subtle things I noticed, things I couldn't unsee once I started looking. The way she smiled at him when he made one of his quiet jokes, the way his eyes lit up when she walked into the room even if I was already there. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. She was hurting, he was comforting. And besides, we were all adults. We were family. A week turned into 2. She wasn't looking for a new apartment, she hadn't returned to work. Her days were spent lounging on the couch, flipping through magazines, or scrolling endlessly through her phone. At night, she and Daniel often stayed up talking while I went to bed early, too exhausted from work to join them. Once, I came down for water and found them sitting on the back porch in the dark, a bottle of wine between them. Their laughter drifted toward me like a dream I wasn't invited into. When they noticed me, they both straightened up almost guiltily. I smiled tightly and went back upstairs. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows twisting above me like questions I couldn't answer. I wanted to believe it was my own insecurities. That maybe I was projecting because Daniel and I hadn't been connecting lately. Maybe I was feeling threatened because Ellie was beautiful and free in ways I never had been. But then I remembered the way Daniel's arm brushed hers that morning as he reached for the coffee, the way she giggled, the way he smiled, the kind of smile he used to give me. I started to dread coming home. I started to wonder what I'd walk into. Would they be laughing, sitting too close on the couch, sharing something I was no longer a part of? Ellie was my sister, my flesh and blood, and yet there was a wall forming between us, one made not of arguments, but of looks and silences. I felt her slipping away from me, but not just into grief or pain, into something else, something I didn't want to name. One night, Daniel asked if we could have dinner out, just the two of us. My heart leaped. Maybe he sensed the distance too. Maybe he wanted to reconnect. I wore my nicest dress and met him at our favorite Italian restaurant. But he was distracted. He kept checking his phone. He smiled, but not at me. His thoughts seemed elsewhere. Halfway through dinner I asked, "Is everything okay between us?" He looked startled, then offered a faint smile. "Yeah, of course. You're just tired. With everything going on." "I feel like I'm losing you," I whispered. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But I could feel it. And deep down, I feared exactly who I was losing him to. It started with glances. Too brief to call stares, but too focused to be casual. I would catch them from the corner of my eye. Daniel looking at Ellie with an expression I couldn't quite place. Was it amusement, admiration, longing, and just as quickly he'd look away. Then came the laughter, private jokes between them that I didn't understand. When I asked what was so funny, they'd exchange a glance, and one of them, usually Daniel, would say, "Oh, it's nothing. You had to be there." But I was there. I was always there. At first I tried to ignore it. After all, wasn't I the one who encouraged Ellie to feel at home? Didn't I tell Daniel to help make her feel comfortable? So I swallowed the uneasy feeling and reminded myself they were family now. This was what family looked like. But soon, the moments piled up. One afternoon, I came home early from work and found them watching a movie together on the couch. She was tucked beneath a blanket, and he was at the far end, but something about their closeness, their easy comfort struck me. The kind of comfort that comes with familiarity, with intimacy. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down louder than necessary. They both turned. Ellie smiled casually. Daniel muted the TV. "You're home early," he said, his tone neutral. "Meeting ended early?" I replied, walking into the kitchen. I poured myself water with shaking hands, not understanding why my chest felt tight. That evening, I lay awake in bed while Daniel snored softly beside me. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was letting jealousy twist something innocent. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Ellie leaned into him when she laughed, or the way Daniel's voice softened when he said her name. The next morning, I decided to test a theory. I called Ellie while I was at work and asked if she wanted to go shopping with me that weekend, just the two of us, something we hadn't done in years. She hesitated, then said, "Oh, I think Daniel mentioned wanting to take me to the museum on Saturday. He said there's a new exhibit." My stomach dropped. "You and Daniel." "Yeah," she said, as if it were obvious. "He said it'd be fun." He hadn't mentioned it to me. Not a word. That night, I brought it up casually at dinner. "So you're taking Ellie to the museum Saturday?" Daniel looked surprised. "She told you?" "You didn't," I said. He shrugged. "It was just an idea. She mentioned she liked modern art and I thought it'd cheer her up." "I like modern art," I said quietly. He didn't reply. That night, while brushing my teeth, I caught my own reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked older, tired. I had always been the older sister, the responsible one, and suddenly I felt replaced, not just in my home, but in my husband's attention. The next day, I took a personal day from work and spent the morning at a cafe near our neighborhood. I needed space. Time to think. I watched other couples pass by the window, some holding hands, some arguing, some silent, and wondered what stories they carried. Did any of them feel as invisible as I did? When I returned home in the afternoon, I heard laughter from upstairs. Soft, low, not boisterous like it used to be when Ellie and I were younger. No, this was different. Intimate. As I climbed the stairs, my footsteps slow, I felt like I was walking toward a truth I didn't want to know. I paused outside the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. I could see Daniel sitting on the bed, his back to me. Ellie was sitting cross-legged in front of him, holding something. A photo album? They were laughing quietly. I knocked, and the sound was like a thunderclap in the hallway. They both jumped. "Hey," I said. "What's so funny?" Ellie smiled, her eyes wide. "We found your old college photos. You and that perm." Daniel chuckled, but his laughter felt forced now. "Oh," I said. "Those are ancient." I walked away before they could say more, my heart thudding in my chest. These weren't just coincidences anymore. They were patterns, a rhythm developing between them that excluded me. And for the first time I allowed the word to surface, fully formed and terrifying. Betrayal. Still, I needed proof, not just suspicion. I needed something undeniable. Because if I was going to confront them, I couldn't risk being wrong. I began to doubt everything, not just them, but myself. I questioned my instincts, replayed every moment, wondering if I was overreacting, if I was reading too much into innocent gestures. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was jealous of their closeness, of Ellie's charm, her ease, the way she still carried a lightness I had long forgotten. But doubt is a dangerous thing. It clouds the mind and corrodes the heart. And even when I told myself to stop watching, to just trust, I found myself doing it anyway. I started coming home early, unannounced. I checked Daniel's phone when he was in the shower, something I had never done before. There were no obvious messages, no flirty texts, nothing out of place. But that only made me feel worse. Because if there was nothing, then I really was just imagining things. Wasn't I? One evening I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the framed photo from our wedding day. Daniel and I looked so happy. His hand on my waist, my eyes locked onto his. It felt like a different lifetime, a different version of me. I placed the photo face down on the nightstand. Later that night, Ellie came into my room with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Hey," she said gently. "You've been quiet lately? Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded. She sat beside me on the bed, her knees tucked under her, just like she used to when we were kids sharing secrets in the dark. "I feel like something's wrong," she said. Have I overstayed my welcome?" I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to say everything I was thinking. That I saw the way she looked at him, that I wasn't stupid, that I knew something was happening between them. But instead I forced a smile. "No, it's just work stress. You know how it is." She studied my face for a moment, then leaned over and hugged me. "You've always been there for me," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Her words felt like knives. That night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to wake Daniel. A few days later, I found a receipt in Daniel's coat pocket for a bracelet. One I hadn't received. It was delicate, gold, with a tiny sapphire. My heart pounded as I turned it over in my hand. I asked him about it over dinner, as casually as I could. "Did you buy something recently? A bracelet?" He blinked. "Oh, yeah, it was for a client. A gift. She just closed on a big deal." I nodded slowly. "Nice of you." But the pit in my stomach only deepened, and then came the final straw. A moment I'll never forget. I had come home late after staying out with a friend. As I unlocked the door, I heard music, soft, jazzy, coming from the living room. I slipped my shoes off and walked in quietly. There they were, dancing, Ellie and Daniel. She was barefoot, wearing one of my old sweaters, her head resting against his chest. His arms were around her, not tight, but tender. They didn't see me. I stood there, frozen, unable to speak. The scene in front of me shattered something inside. Not because of what they were doing, but because of how natural it looked. How right it seemed. Then Daniel saw me. He let go of her immediately. "It's not what it looks like," he said too quickly, stepping back. Ellie turned, her face pale. I said nothing. I just turned around and walked up the stairs. In our bedroom, I locked the door behind me and slid down against it, shaking. It wasn't proof, not in a courtroom. But in my heart I knew what I had seen. The next morning, Daniel knocked gently. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Eventually, I heard footsteps walking away. I had become a ghost in my own home, caught between suspicion and grief, between love and betrayal. I didn't want to be the one to tear the family apart, but I also couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. Something had changed, and I was the only one pretending it hadn't. The night I finally heard them whispering in the kitchen was a quiet, rainy Thursday. I had gone to bed early, pretending to sleep, but my mind was restless. I was numb with exhaustion, not just physical, but the kind that sets in when you've been pretending everything's fine for too long. The house was mostly dark. I heard the creak of the kitchen floorboards just past midnight and knew they were down there. At first, I told myself not to listen, to stay in bed and keep pretending. But curiosity is a powerful thing. Or maybe it was survival. I needed to know. I slipped out of bed and crept to the staircase. The glow from the kitchen spilled faintly into the hallway. Their voices were low, almost murmurs, the way people speak when they don't want to wake the house. Or when they don't want to be heard. I moved down one step at a time, each creak underfoot like a gunshot in the silence. I stopped just before the final step and sat, leaning slightly toward the voices. I feel so guilty, Ellie whispered. Her voice trembled, but not with sadness, with conflict. You didn't do anything wrong, Daniel said. His tone was soft, reassuring. We didn't do anything. There was a pause. I could hear the clink of a spoon against a mug. But you think about it, don't you? She asked. Silence, sometimes, he admitted. My breath caught in my throat. I do too, Ellie said. But I hate myself for it. Daniel sighed. She doesn't deserve this. She's always been good to both of us. She's my sister, Ellie whispered. I keep thinking, what if she finds out? Another pause. My heart was pounding so loudly I feared they'd hear it through the floorboards. She won't? Daniel said eventually. Nothing's happened. We're just close? That's all. Ellie said nothing. The silence stretched heavy and thick. I think we need to pull back, she said quietly. This can't go on. I know, Daniel replied. I've been thinking the same. And then I heard something that stopped me cold. The sound of a hand brushing against something, followed by a deep, slow breath. I imagined him touching her hand, her cheek, maybe tucking her hair behind her ear the way he used to do with me. I stood up, trembling. I walked down the last step and into the kitchen. They both jumped. Ellie's eyes widened. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Oh, I said. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears. Late, night tea party. They scrambled to cover their panic. We couldn't sleep, Ellie said quickly. I noticed. I replied, walking to the fridge, pretending to look for something. No one spoke for several long seconds. I'm going back to bed, I said, closing the fridge without taking anything. I turned to leave but paused in the doorway. You're right, you know? I said without looking at them. I don't deserve this. And then I walked back upstairs. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't scream or break things. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the thing I feared most had already happened. Not a full-blown affair, but something worse. An emotional betrayal, the kind that starts quiet and innocent and ends with a marriage hollowed out from the inside. The next morning, I acted normal, made breakfast, asked about their plans for the day. But inside, everything had changed. I was no longer afraid of losing them. I was preparing to let them go. I didn't plan the confrontation. It wasn't scripted in my mind like I imagined it would be. No dramatic monologue, no slamming of doors or throwing of plates. It just happened. A slow leak of months of confusion, heartache, and disillusionment that finally burst through the fragile dam of civility. It was a Saturday morning. The house was unusually quiet. Ellie had gone out for groceries and Daniel was folding laundry in the living room. I watched him from the kitchen, his movements automatic, the way someone folds clothes while their mind is somewhere else entirely. I walked in and sat across from him. He looked up, startled, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in days. I want to talk, I said simply. He nodded slowly, setting down a t-shirt. Okay. My hands were cold. I tucked them under my thighs to keep them from shaking. I heard you too, I said. In the kitchen, the other night. His eyes froze, just for a second. Then he looked away. I know nothing physical happened. I added. But I also know something did. He was quiet for a long moment. I didn't mean for it to, he said finally. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't mean for it, but it still did. I expected anger, maybe even defiance. But what I saw in his face was worse. Shame, that helpless, heavy guilt of someone who didn't know how to undo the damage they had caused. She was just there, he said softly. And I was lonely. We've been drifting apart for months. And that made it okay? I asked, my voice trembling. To fall for my sister? He shook his head. No, it wasn't okay. It was wrong. I know that. I stared at him, searching for the man I married, the one who used to kiss my forehead every night, who danced with me in the kitchen after dinner. But all I saw was a stranger who couldn't meet my eyes. Ellie returned minutes later, bags in hand, her expression lighting up. Until she saw us. She froze in the doorway. I know, I said to her. Her face went pale. The grocery bags slipped from her hands, apples rolling across the floor. Please, she whispered. We didn't. I know nothing happened, I said, standing. But something did, and that's enough. She started crying, quiet, breathless sobs. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I replied. You both did. I walked past her and into the hallway, breathing hard. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just stood there, trying to remember when this house stopped feeling like home. Daniel followed me. What now? You both need to leave? I said without turning around. There was silence behind me, the longest I've ever felt. Ellie's voice cracked behind him. I have nowhere to go. You have friends, I said. You had someone before me. You'll find someone else. Daniel tried again. We can fix this. Maybe we see someone, talk to a therapist. I turned to face him. You didn't want therapy when I asked last year. You wanted space. And you found it, in her. He didn't deny it. That night, they packed their things. Ellie cried as she hugged me one last time, but I didn't hug her back. Daniel looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "I'm sorry." I closed the door behind them without a word. The silence afterward was deafening. But it was clean. It didn't lie to me, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The aftermath didn't feel like freedom, it felt like grief. Heavy, confusing, and unpredictable. I expected to feel relief once they were gone, some sort of righteous peace. Instead, the house echoed with absence. Every room felt like a memory. Their laughter still lingered in the walls. I kept finding traces of them: Ellie's forgotten earring on the bathroom sink, Daniel's cologne trapped in the closet's stale air. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the loneliness that came after. I had cut out the infection, but the wound was still wide open. My parents didn't react the way I expected. I called them a few days later, the phone trembling in my hand, and explained what had happened. I was raw and quiet, trying not to sound too bitter or too broken. I thought they would side with me. I thought they'd be angry on my behalf. But my mother sighed and said, "You've always been a little too possessive, sweetheart. Maybe you misunderstood the situation." I was stunned. Possessive. I caught them. They admitted it. She was hurting, she said gently. "And you know Ellie. She's never been good with boundaries. Maybe she leaned on Daniel more than she should have, but that doesn't mean they meant to betray you." "And what about Daniel?" I asked, my voice cracking. "He's my husband, Mom." My father chimed in then, his voice tired. "People make mistakes. Sometimes forgiveness is better than pride." I sat in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, my heart sinking lower with each word. "You're saying this is my fault?" I whispered. "Not your fault," my mother said quickly. "But maybe it wasn't all theirs either." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. They visited a week later, uninvited. They brought soup and concerned faces. My mother walked through the house like it was a crime scene, touching the doorknobs and peeking into rooms. "You're not eating enough," she said. "You've lost weight." I sat at the table, hollow and unmoved. My father glanced around uncomfortably. "You could stay with us for a bit, or we could bring Ellie here to talk. You three need to sort this out." "I don't want to sort anything," I said. "I want her gone from my life. She's your sister." She stopped being that when she looked at my husband like he was hers. My mother's face pinched in disapproval. She was vulnerable, and I wasn't. I shot back silence. Eventually they left, retreating with their casserole dish and furrowed brows. And I was left alone again. Family, I learned, isn't always a refuge. Sometimes it's a weight. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are too invested in keeping the illusion of harmony alive. They'd rather tape over the cracks than admit the whole structure was rotting. Over the next few weeks, calls came in, cousins, aunts, even my godmother, all offering perspective, all trying to make peace. But no one asked how I felt. No one asked what it was like to live in a house where your husband and your sister whispered in the dark, pretending not to betray you while doing exactly that. I stopped answering. I started going for long walks after work. I repainted the guest room. I boxed up wedding photos and put them in storage. I cooked only for one and left the second chair at the dining table empty. Some nights, I stared at my phone, tempted to send angry texts to unleash all the words I hadn't said, but I didn't. I knew better. Silence was stronger than any insult. It was final. The hardest part wasn't losing them. It was realizing they were never really mine to begin with. The first few days without them were strangely quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. I thought I'd feel some kind of freedom, some lightness in their absence. But instead, it felt like I was living in a museum of my own undoing. Every object, suddenly too loud in its stillness. The couch where Daniel and Ellie had sat too close, I couldn't bear to look at it. The wine glasses, I packed them away. Even the guest room, her room, stood untouched. The air inside somehow thicker. I closed the door and left it that way. The silence was the worst. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. I returned to work, throwing myself into deadlines and meetings. I smiled when people asked how I was, said things like, "Oh, it's been a tough month, but I'm okay now," and nodded as if that was the whole truth. But inside I was unraveling. Nights were the hardest. I'd come home, pour a glass of wine, and sit on the balcony alone, listening to the wind and the occasional car pass by. No Daniel at the stove humming as he cooked. No Ellie bouncing down the stairs in one of my sweaters. Just me. And the dark. I started talking to myself, quietly, almost like prayer. "You're okay. You're safe. You're strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt like a shell. I thought about calling Daniel sometimes, not to reconcile. I knew we were past that, but to ask the questions that haunted me. Did you ever love me? Did she? Were you ever going to tell me the truth? But I never picked up the phone. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want more half-truths. And besides, I knew what he would say. He'd sound sorry, gentle. He'd say, "One never meant to hurt you." As if that excused anything, one night I tried going out. A friend from work invited me to a gallery opening. I put on makeup, curled my hair, and slipped into a dress that used to make Daniel stare. But when I got there, I realized how disconnected I was. Everyone else was laughing, sipping champagne, admiring the art. I stood near a painting of a fractured mirror and thought, that's me. A stranger came up and tried to chat. He was polite, kind even, but I felt nothing. No spark, no interest. Just numbness. I left early, walked home through the city streets, and cried in the elevator up to my apartment. Grief after betrayal isn't just sadness. It's disorientation. It's walking through your own life and realizing you don't recognize it anymore. I stopped talking to most of my extended family. I couldn't stand the fake concern, the guilt-ridden messages from people who hoped we could all come together again someday. I didn't want reconciliation. I wanted accountability. And none of them seemed to understand that. I started seeing a therapist. I told her everything. How the betrayal started slow, how I ignored the signs, how I blamed myself. She listened, really listened, and she didn't tell me to forgive. She told me to heal. Forgiveness is a gift, she said. You don't owe it to anyone. The words stayed with me. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The apartment grew less haunted. I redecorated. I replaced the couch. I painted the living room a deep forest green. I planted herbs on the windowsill. Slowly, I reclaimed my space, and somewhere in that silence, I found pieces of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. I started writing again. Nothing grand, just journal entries, small essays. I wrote about betrayal, about love, about how family can break your heart in ways strangers never could. And in doing so, I began to understand something essential. I didn't lose my sister. I saw her clearly for the first time. I didn't lose my husband. I uncovered the truth about our marriage. The loss was still real. But so was the clarity. And that clarity, in its quiet, painful way, was a beginning. It had been nearly 4 months since I last saw them, Daniel and Ellie. 4 long, aching months of unanswered questions and the slow, grinding process of rebuilding myself from the rubble they left behind. I wasn't healed. I still flinched at certain smells, still avoided movies about betrayal, still found myself checking the locks twice before bed. But I was moving forward, or at least I was trying to. Then, one evening I got the message. It was from Ellie. I hadn't blocked her, not because I expected her to reach out, but because I wasn't ready to close the door completely. Not yet. Maybe some part of me still wanted an explanation. A real one. Her name lit up on my phone screen while I was brushing my teeth. My heart dropped. I stared at it, toothbrush still in my mouth, foam gathering at the corners of my lips. I rinsed quickly and sat down on the edge of my bed, holding the phone like it might explode. The message was long, almost an essay. It started simply, I know I don't deserve your time. She told me how sorry she was. Not the vague kind of sorry, not the if I hurt you kind, but detailed, brutal, raw. She described the moment she realized what she was feeling for Daniel wasn't just admiration. How she hated herself for it. How she tried to pull back, but every day in the house made it harder. How his attention filled something inside her that had been broken long before him. She admitted to emotional intimacy, to stolen moments of closeness that, while not physical, crossed a line. I don't know when it stopped being sisterly, she wrote, but by the time I realized it was already too far gone. She also told me something that broke my heart in a different way, that she had looked up to me all her life, that I had always seemed like the version of herself she could never be, stable, loved, safe. And that part of her hated that. And that hate turned into something darker when Daniel started giving her the attention she felt she never got from anyone else. It was cruel and it was honest. I didn't mean to hurt you, she wrote again. But I did. And I have to live with that. She ended with something I didn't expect. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to understand who I am and why I did what I did. But I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth. I read the message twice, 3 times. I cried. Not the heaving sobs of fresh betrayal, but quiet tears, of loss, of clarity, of something I couldn't name. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. The next morning, I drafted a reply. I thanked her for her honesty. I told her that while I appreciated the message, it didn't change things, that I needed space, that I still didn't trust her, that maybe I never would, but I was glad she was seeking help, and I hoped she'd keep doing the work. Then I deleted it. Instead, I left her on read. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't cruelty. It was protection. Some doors aren't meant to reopen. That message stayed with me though. It echoed in my thoughts during quiet moments. At the grocery store, while folding laundry, while walking past the guest room, I didn't regret reading it, but I didn't regret leaving it unanswered either. Sometimes, the closure you need isn't a conversation. Sometimes, it's choosing silence. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when I decided to do what I'd been avoiding for months. Clear out the guest room. Ellie's room. The one I had kept closed as if silence could preserve my sanity. But avoidance, I'd learned, is just another way of prolonging pain. I opened the door and stepped inside, half expecting to feel an invisible weight fall on me. But it was just a room now, dusty, stale, quiet. The bed was still made the way she left it, a few books stacked on the nightstand, a framed photo of us from childhood, both smiling with popsicles in our hands. I stood there for a moment before I began. I moved slowly, pulling open drawers, collecting her clothes into donation bags. I found a notebook under the bed, along with a pair of her socks and an old scarf. The notebook was plain, blue cover, no label. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It was a diary, not a detailed journal with dates and entries, more like scraps of thoughts, sentences, fragments, memories scribbled in her looping handwriting. At first, it was benign, notes about her ex, about how lost she felt, about how sleeping in a familiar house reminded her of better times. But then the entry shifted. One page read, "Hey, understands me? It's dangerous, but I feel seen for the first time in forever." Another said, "Why does it feel so good to make her laugh one minute and envy her the next?" And then, "Think I love him. Or maybe I love how he looks at me." I felt my throat tighten as I turned the pages, each line cutting a little deeper. "She doesn't notice how he touches my shoulder. Or maybe she does. I don't know what's worse. I keep waiting for him to stop. To say no. But he doesn't. We haven't kissed. We haven't touched. But this feels worse. It's in the silence." I closed the diary and sat on the bed, unable to breathe. There it was. The truth I always suspected but never saw laid out so plainly. It wasn't just emotional entanglement. It was a slow erosion of boundaries, a quiet seduction of vulnerability. On both their parts, I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Because now I knew for certain that she had fallen for him. And he had let her. There was no moment where it all exploded. No final act of betrayal I could point to and say, "There, that was the moment they ruined everything." It had been a slow fade. A soft, secret betrayal that bloomed in the spaces I trusted them to hold sacred. I placed the diary on the floor beside me and cried. Not because it hurt more, but because I finally stopped pretending it hurt less. That night, I didn't text Ellie. I didn't call Daniel. But I wrote in my own journal. I wrote, "It's not my fault. I loved fully. I trusted deeply. I forgave too often. And now, I begin again, without them." I boxed up the diary and the rest of her things. I placed them in the hallway for donation or destruction. I didn't care which. Some truths aren't meant to be kept, and some wounds need light to heal. The invitation arrived in late spring. A creamy envelope with gold script, hand-addressed. My cousin Marissa was getting married, and the whole family would be there, including Ellie. And, probably, Daniel. I stared at the card for a long time, weighing whether I had the strength to go. I'd spent nearly a year avoiding family gatherings, skipping holidays and birthdays. It had become easier not to explain. Easier not to be asked if we were speaking yet, if things had cooled off, if I was ready to forgive. But this time was different. I wanted to go. Not to make a statement, not even to confront anyone, but because I was tired of hiding, tired of letting their choices shape my absence. The wedding was held at a beautiful vineyard a few hours outside the city, the kind of place where the sun painted the hills gold and everyone pretended life was uncomplicated. I arrived in a navy dress and soft curls, alone but composed. My mother was the first to greet me, her smile tight, her hug tentative. "I'm glad you came," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might shatter something fragile. I nodded but said nothing. Inside, I spotted Ellie almost immediately. She was standing near the back, chatting with one of our cousins. She looked thinner, her hair shorter, her makeup more muted than I remembered. She caught my eye, and for a split second, everything froze. Then she looked away. Daniel was there too, seated near the bar, sipping something amber-colored. His eyes didn't find me at first. But eventually, they did, and when they did, he didn't smile. Dinner was awkward. I sat with distant relatives who didn't ask too many questions. But I could feel the weight of glances across the room, feel the careful choreography of people avoiding placing us too near each other. Even Marissa looked nervous when she stopped by my table. "I hope you're okay," she whispered, squeezing my shoulder. I smiled. "I'm fine." After the toast, after the dancing began, I stepped outside for air. The cool breeze was a welcome contrast to the stifling emotions inside. I stood beneath a tree looking out over the vineyard rows when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Ellie. She approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Hey," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. I nodded. "You look beautiful," she offered. "So do you." We stood in silence for a long moment. "I didn't expect you to come," she admitted. "I wasn't going to," I said. "But I'm tired of pretending I don't belong." She winced. "I never wanted to push you out." "But you did." She nodded, shame written all over her face. "I think about it every day. What I did, what I let happen, it's the biggest regret of my life." I looked at her, really looked. Not as the sister who betrayed me, but as the woman who had to live with that betrayal. And for the first time, I saw how deeply it had scarred her too. "I read your message," I said. "And your diary." Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. "I believe you're sorry," I continued. "But I also believe you knew exactly what you were doing while it was happening." "I did?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. "And I hated myself for it?" I nodded. "I'm glad you're trying to get better, I really am, but we're not going to be sisters again. That door's closed," she cried then. Quietly. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She just nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand," she said. "And I'll always love you, even if you never speak to me again." I didn't reply. She turned and walked away. I stayed under the tree for a while longer, letting the breeze settle everything in me. Inside, the music played, laughter rose, life went on. And I let it. The final conversation with Daniel didn't happen until nearly a year after everything had crumbled. It was accidental, as most necessary things are. We ran into each other in a bookstore, of all places, standing across from each other in the self-help section. He looked older, thinner. His beard had grown in more than I'd ever seen it. For a moment we both stood frozen, books in hand, the silence between us echoing louder than any shout. He was the first to speak. "You look well." I nodded. "So do you?" He gave a weak smile. "Do you have time to talk?" I hesitated, then gestured toward the small cafe attached to the store. "A few minutes?" We sat across from each other with warm mugs we barely touched. I watched him struggle to find a beginning, to assemble whatever version of the truth he'd been carrying all this time. "I've rehearsed this in my head 1,000 times. He began, "but it never sounds right." "You don't have to rehearse," I said quietly. "Just be honest." He looked down at his coffee. "I never set out to hurt you, not ever. What happened with Ellie, it started with small things. Conversations, comfort. We were both lonely, and neither of us stopped it when we should have." "Did you love her?" I asked. He looked up, surprised by the bluntness, then he shook his head slowly. "No. I think I loved the way she made me feel, admired, understood. It was selfish and temporary. I never stopped loving you." The words hit me like wind through a cracked window, cold, unexpected. "I loved you," he said again. "And I lost you. Not because I stopped, but because I forgot how to show it." I blinked back tears. "Then why didn't you fight for me?" His face crumbled slightly. "Because I didn't think I deserved to. And because I was ashamed." I believed him. Maybe for the first time I truly did. We sat in silence for a long moment. No accusations, no rehashing. "I've started over," he said eventually. "New place, new job, I'm working on myself, I don't date, I don't want to." I nodded. "I'm glad." He looked at me then, a softness in his expression that I remembered from better years. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but is there any part of you that forgives me?" I thought about it. Truly thought. "Less," I said. "But that doesn't mean we're okay." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. "I'm not looking for a future," he said. I just needed to say it out loud. "I'm sorry for everything." I reached for my coat. "I know you are, and I hope you find peace." We stood, and for a second, I thought he might reach out to hug me. But he didn't. He just watched me go. As I walked out into the fading afternoon light, I felt something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness in full, not closure tied with a ribbon, but release. Sometimes the only ending we get is the one we make for ourselves. Years passed. Not suddenly, not without scars, but slowly, like the way light returns after a long winter. At first, everything still reminded me of Ellie's laugh in a stranger's voice, Daniel's scent lingering in the corners of memory. But over time, the sting dulled. Not because I forgot, but because I rebuilt. I moved to a smaller apartment closer to work. It was sunlit and quiet, mine entirely. I filled it with books and music and photos that didn't ache. The guest room became a writing space, no longer haunted by silence or guilt. I adopted a rescue cat named Murphy who sprawled across my keyboard when he wanted attention and meowed at the door like a tiny, persistent reminder that life goes on. Friends drifted back in. I reconnected with college acquaintances, found a new rhythm of Sunday brunches and spontaneous movie nights. It took effort, sometimes more than I had, but I made space for joy again. And slowly I stopped waking up angry. I started reading again, not just to escape, but to feel. I took a solo trip to the coast, walking along cliffs with the wind in my face, screaming into the sea just to hear my voice echo. I journaled. I meditated. I forgave myself. Forgiveness, not for them. For me, for the years I spent doubting my instincts, apologizing for things I never did, loving people who only knew how to take. Ellie reached out once more. A simple holiday card with no message. Just her name. I didn't reply. But I didn't throw it away either. I kept it in a drawer, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because it no longer hurt to see her name. Daniel never wrote again. That last conversation was the final page between us. I was grateful for that. Somewhere along the way, I stopped hoping they'd change. I stopped wondering what might have been. Because what came after? The quiet, the rebuilding, the slow rediscovery of myself was better than anything they could have offered. I found peace, not the kind wrapped in apologies or stitched together by family pressure, but the real kind, the one that comes from walking through fire and realizing you're still standing. And when people ask now, do you talk to your sister, your ex? I just smile gently and say, no. Some people are part of your story, not your future. And that's enough. These are stories that show the consequences and limits of family relationships. Sisterhood, marriage, they are bonds built on trust, loyalty, and care. But when those are broken, the fracture is deep, and not all wounds are meant to be mended. Betrayal from within the family is a unique kind of pain. It teaches us about boundaries, about strength, about the importance of choosing ourselves when others won't. If you've ever felt that kind of heartbreak, know you're not alone. Have you experienced a betrayal in your family? Were you able to forgive? Or did you walk away like I did? Tell me your story in the comments. And if this touched something inside you, please subscribe for more stories like this.